Great, I'll get started. So thanks everyone very much for coming. I'm Susanna Fleiss. I'm conducting knowledge exchange for the TreE PlaNat project, which is conducting socio-ecological research around using natural colonisation to create new woodlands. And something that's come up in our discussions with land managers and other stakeholders involved in woodland creation is the issue of funding for natural colonisation and how it can be complicated or sometimes it's not available in the ways that people would like. So we thought it'd be really interesting to bring together a number of people from different organisations who are funding natural colonisation in a few different ways. And we'll hear from a number of them today. I'll leave it to the speakers to introduce themselves, and then we'll finish up with a question and answer session and a discussion with all the speakers and some of their colleagues. So while people are speaking, if you want, you can post any questions you want in the chat, and I guess speakers can have a look through once they've finished, and I'll also go through and we can answer those in the session at the end. So in this webinar, we're mostly focusing on funding options in England, not because we don't think the other nations are important, but just because that happens to be where we've managed to get to with the project so far. So thanks very much. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Rachel Orchard, who is our first speaker.
Thank you, Susanna. I will just share my screen. Hopefully that's working. So hello everyone, I'm Rachel Orchard. I'm a social scientist at Forest Research, and I'm working on the TreE PlaNat project with Susanna, but also on a sister project, also looking at natural colonisation, which is the NCF Social Dimensions to Natural Colonisation project. And within that, I'm looking particularly at the different incentive schemes, what the uptake is, and that is obviously very relevant. So I'll be sharing that research with you today. So to go back a step, in terms of what are we meaning by natural colonisation, it's become clear from our research that this isn't a phrase that land managers are using regularly. So we're currently defining it fairly broadly as woodland creation and expansion through natural processes. Although the more ecological definition can be seen in this diagram, where natural colonisation is where trees are self-seeding on land that hasn't been wooded in the past 20 years, whereas natural regeneration is where there has been woodland, it's been cleared, and then the trees self-seed, to be technical. So in this research, what we're looking at is the following research questions. So we started by doing a support map, which is what I'll be presenting to you today. And that's where we're really asking what natural colonisation incentive schemes are out there. We've then collected data from these different schemes and are currently doing the data analysis for that. And then the next step is going to be carrying out focus groups to delve a little deeper into what is the awareness of the different schemes, what are the factors that are influencing land managers' uptake of specific schemes, and what would improve these schemes. And then once we have all of our data, we'll carry out some validation workshops before sharing it with the wider world. So in terms of what schemes are out there, there's 5 key ones that have come to my attention that have the common objective of woodland expansion. So we've got speakers from the first 3 of these, so I won't go into too much detail, but we'll try to just highlight some of the key similarities and differences. So for UCO, this is available across England, and since 2021, they've had this natural colonisation element to it. They have the conditions that the land proposed needs to be within 75 metres of a seed source, and this should be 2 species of trees that are seed bearing. And interestingly, this guidance has also been followed by the Grow Back Greener programme and the Trees for Climate programme. However, there's a bit of variation in terms of the area of land. So for UCO, they want a minimum of 0.5 hectares, whereas this is a little bit lower for those other two programs. And in terms of the aim, both UCO and Trees for Climate would like there to be 100 trees per hectare by year 10, whereas Grow Back Greener would like there to be 400 trees per hectare. And then there's the North York Moors Woodland Creation Scheme, and this has been going a little bit longer, since 2017. They don't have any seed source requirement, and they have a bit of a longer time frame in terms of wanting 20% woodland cover by year 25. However, they would like there to be native trees, so if non-natives start regenerating, then those need to be managed. There's also the Farming and Forestry Grant, which the National Forest is currently piloting, and this is aimed specifically at farmers, and encompassing a broader range of approaches, but also would like a larger area of land, so between 25 to 50 hectares, although this could be a collaboration between different landowners to reach that minimum area. I've also, sorry. So I've also come across these other schemes that do include or accept natural colonisation, however, not with the sole objective of woodland expansion. This is looking more broadly at nature recovery. So, for example, there's the countryside stewardship, woodland, wood pasture, and successional scrub options. And these are not intended for woodland creation. However, you can have trees self-seed up to that are allowed to grow up to 5 meters tall, and then if they keep growing, then you'll need to go and get an environmental impact assessment, and it will be categorized as woodland. And for that one, there's no seed source limit. There's also the farming and protected landscapes, and this is moderated by each of the national parks or the AOMBs. This is only available for a certain amount of time, so 2021 to 2025, and it's highly dependent on the location as to whether natural colonisation falls within their accepted proposals. So, for example, in the Lake District, it has been used for regeneration, whereas in Northumberland, it's been used to remove regeneration. So, really interesting one there. And then moving into sort of green finance, private investment, there's the collaboration between Aviva and the Wildlife Trusts for their Temperate Rainforest Fund. And this is very new and is looking at the areas of the UK and the oceanic climate zones. And this is an interesting one because for the collaboration, it needs to fit within the Woodland Carbon Code conditions. And it's been brought to my attention that this is lower for natural colonisation than it is for direct planting, although I haven't had a chance to delve into the research on that yet. There's also still a broader question in terms of the role of green finance and private investment that I don't feel like I've fully grasped all of the different options out there. But is definitely a really interesting area that I think is constantly evolving. So the key findings so far is that the choice of incentive schemes vary significantly based on where you are. So as you can see from this map, if you happen to be in that North York Moors area, then you've got the choice of 4 different schemes. However, if you're in the light grey rest of England, then UCO is your only option. All of the schemes are open to a mix of natural colonisation and planting approaches. It's not a one size fits all, and the grant rates and conditions vary. All the schemes are relatively young, and there's also quite a variation in size, although the majority of them, the uptake has been for parcels of land that are less than 5 hectares. And then it's also interesting that other schemes are following UCO's guidance of the seed source being within 75 metres of the area of land. So the next step in our research is to carry out 3 focus groups, and these will be with woodland advisors, land managers who have used one of these schemes, land managers who are interested in natural colonisation but not used any schemes or carried it out yet, and those who have carried out natural colonisation but not used any funding to do so. So if you are interested in discussing the topic further, then please do contact me. The focus groups are in November, and it would be great to hear about your experiences and share your thoughts on this topic. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Rachel. That was really great. So next we're going to hear from Louise at the Forestry Commission about UCO.
Share my slides quickly. Okay, you can all hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I'm Louise Alexander from the Forestry Commission. I'm an Incentives Development Manager for the England Woodland Creation Office, otherwise known as UCO. I have with me today Alec Rhodes, who is the Head of Incentives Development and Compliance. So funding for natural colonisation under UCO, when we talk about natural colonisation in UCO, it does refer to using natural processes to establish woodland. So it includes natural colonisation and natural regeneration. There was a high level of support for this when it was introduced in 2021, welcomed by stakeholders, and it was the first time that this established method had been included in woodland creation grants since the Woodland Grant Scheme in 1994. It was informed by feedback from the England Woodland Biodiversity Group. Wasn't an easy fit with UCO, there's lots of different views, but we did attempt to strike a balance for the best use of public money. Where possible, this establishment method is being treated in exactly the same way as a normal UCO application would be for normal standard planting in terms of the level and timing of support. There are some differences in terms of eligibility and the way in which we monitor the projects. So obviously lots of benefits in using natural colonisation. It provides an extended period of early successional habitats with high biodiversity value. It contributes to the woodland creation targets without the need of that nursery tree stock. The trees generally are well adapted to the sites in which they're colonising. It results in a resilient woodland and the natural development of mosaic habitats. It can sit, like Rachel said, it can sit alongside areas of planting within the same scheme. It's not an all or nothing. It can be a mix of both. There is obviously the risk that establishment might not take place, and that could be considered an ineffective use of public funds. It's a riskier approach than traditional planting, and so the design stage is really important to get right to make sure that it's suitable. So in terms of eligibility and requirements, the standard requirements for a UCO application need to be met, and in addition to that, as Rachel mentioned, the woodland creation area must be within 75 metres from the canopy, tree crown or hedgerow. We need at least 2 viable tree species within that tree source, and it can include native, non-natives, and where appropriate, ash. It can also include areas of open space. So the expectation is that by year 10, we'll see 60% of woody cover and a minimum of 100 tree stems per hectare. Woody cover for us in UCO encompasses any woody species. It includes bramble, thorny scrub such as hawthorn and blackthorn, and obviously tree species. And then at years 5 and 10, a woodland officer will check the site to see whether it's developing as expected, and any remedial planting is then funded through relevant support mechanisms that are available at the time. Tool items. This is assessed on a site-by-site basis in exactly the same way as it would be with traditional planting. Fencing is the preferred option for tree protection, but other tree protection options can be considered where there's a risk of deer damage that's very low. ground preparation can be offered, scarification, for example, if that will increase germination levels, and advanced supplementary planting. This advanced supplementary planting might be suitable on suboptimal or large sites where parts of the establishment area are really quite some distance from the mature seed-bearing seeds. So applicants will have the option of clump or very low density tree planting, and that's to help meet those minimum stocking requirements if there's a concern that they might not be met. It may also be used where they want to exceed the minimum stocking density requirements if there are other objectives within the bigger proposal. And where UCO additional contributions form part of the UCO agreement, they will be paid as a one-off payment after the capital works are complete and at the same rate as for planting trees. So maintenance payments, annual maintenance payments, the eligibility for them requires for the agreement holder to maintain their fencing, to control invasive non-natives that might be present. They can use herbicides, but only to control those non-natives, and they mustn't use herbicides too close to a water source. Supplementary planting needs to be undertaken at years 5 and 10, and they must dispose of any tree guards that have been used for supplementary planting when they're no longer required, and that needs to be in accordance with waste disposal regulations. So hopefully they would gather them and recycle them. And they must also maintain areas of open space within the agreement. Okay, so one of the requirements is also before they apply, if they're going to include natural colonisation within their application, we ask them to do a pre-application site assessment. So they need to provide evidence or have a look at existing colonisation at the site. If there is existing colonisation, can it be protected? Is there evidence of natural colonisation on adjacent or similar sites? Are there sufficient quantities of suitable seed source material, like we said, two species minimum? And is this within the area of 75 metres of the woodland hedgerow or boundary? Will the trees bear seeds? Are they mature enough to do so? And are the tree species present suitable for delivering the management objectives of the scheme? A wind dispersed species located in suitable places. In terms of site suitability, is the soil type, vegetation and land use history suitable for supporting natural colonisation? Are germination sites present, and will scarification increase germination? It's possible that ripping or subsoiling might be required to break an undulated layer, so plough punning, for example, and will vegetation management be needed? In terms of browsing, is the land currently used for grazing? And if so, what's the intensity or the grazing ratio? And can this be controlled? And is there evidence of browsing and grazing by deer, rabbits or hares? And again, how can that be controlled if that's the case? So the applicant needs to determine the management objectives. They need to carry out the site assessment, and they really then need to stand back and really ask themselves whether the natural colonisation is an appropriate method for achieving their overall aims. It's more likely, but isn't limited to, objectives that are related to nature recovery and social recreational benefits. So the suitability is demonstrated by the applicant, and then this is confirmed by the woodland officer when he goes along and does his, or she, excuse me, when they pop along and do their first site visit. Okay, so as I said, the woodland officer will do a site visit at year 5 and year 10, and this is to determine that everything is proceeding as it should be. They'll look at the structure of the woodland as it's developing, the age and range of seedlings and saplings. Is that sufficient? Is the size of the saplings less or greater than 50 centimetres? Are the species colonising the agreement land consistent with the species as outlined in their agreements? If they're not the same, is that still okay? And do we need to apply an amendment? Is there any evidence of non-native species? Woody cover levels, are these developing at an appropriate rate? Is there evidence of seedling establishment, growth, height distribution and survival? The woodland officer will also look at the density of tree stems and again see if that's developing at the required rate that we would expect. And has canopy closure impacted light levels? Should respacing be considered? The woodland officer is also going to look at this stage at any capital items that we funded. So they'll be looking at fencing, making sure it's maintained. Any planned open space has also been maintained. If the applicant opted for advanced supplementary planting at the start, they'll also be checking on the health of those trees, whether they're still protected, whether any dead trees have been replaced. And they'll also be checking to see that herbicides haven't been used too close to those water sources. So also, if at year 10, if this minimum requirement, 60% woody cover and 100 stems per hectare, hasn't been met and remedial planting takes place, then there'll also be a site visit at year 15. Okay, and throughout this whole process, we've got the technical support from the Forestry Commission area ecologists and the Natural England advisors. This table really summarises what we've already discussed. Okay, I won't run through the whole thing again, but you will notice at year 10, there might, and I say might, be an option available for agreement holders to move over to elm. Okay, so the details of this are still being ironed out. It's something that we're hoping to be able to offer. We cannot support capital works after the capital funding period. So support for remedial planting does need to come from a future offer, and that future offer might be elm. We need to work through the natural colonisation and see that it can feed through into support under elm. So that's something that's been looked at present. Again, this just summarises, I've touched on all of this. The advanced supplementary planting we've covered. I just wanted to highlight the difference between responsive supplementary planting and remedial supplementary planting. So responsive supplementary planting aims to enrich the species composition that is there, supports the development of woodland structure, and it infills any areas where there's not been any colonisation. Remedial supplementary planting is where there really hasn't been any natural colonisation that's taken place. It really hasn't worked. Obviously unrealistic for the woodland officers to count every single tree across a whole site. Sometimes some of the trees are going to be hidden by developing thorny scrub as well, so could be missed. So the density and species of tree stems is informally determined by inspecting the site and then extrapolating to determine stems per hectare. And the use of vegetation percentage cover charts they use these to help them record the cover and monitor progress. And that's me. Sorry, lots of information.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was fantastic. It's great to have such a comprehensive overview. So next we've got Sian from the Woodland Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, and I'll just share my slides if I can. So hopefully is that visible to everybody? Okay, so my name's Sian Atkinson. I work for the Woodland Trust as Senior Outreach Manager in covering the whole of Northern England. I'm going to be talking to you today about a grant that we have in the Northern Forest called Grow Back Greener, and the one particular element of that which applies to what we call natural processes, so creating woodland through natural processes. This has already been touched on, but from our perspective at the Woodland Trust, we're really keen to see more woodland created through natural processes. It potentially can result in woods that are better adapted to local conditions. Biosecurity's perhaps not been mentioned, and rather than importing trees into a site where there's a risk of bringing in disease, you know, using tree seeds that are on the site or tree stock that's nearby sort of reduces that risk. And we can also work out quite a lot cheaper. And obviously we're keen to minimise plastics as well. So on the Trust's own estate, we no longer plant using any single-use plastics. So Grow Back Greener is a grant that sort of runs alongside UCO and the Trees for Climate funding in the Northern Forest. And I've put this map up. It's a little bit complicated looking, but if you just look at the red dotted line, that'll give you the boundary as it's been agreed now for the Northern Forest. So it follows administrative boundaries and boundaries of the protected landscapes, the national parks. It's really quite a big area. It's a big swathe of England across Northern England. And within this area, the Woodland Trust is the accountable body, or not the accountable body, but the sort of administrator for a grant called Grow Back Greener, which comes out of the Nature for Climate Fund, DEFRA's Nature for Climate Fund. The Northern Forest is a partnership between the Woodland Trust, the 4 community forests, so Mersey Forest, Manchester City of Trees, White Rose Forest and Humber Forest, and the Community Forest Trust. Grow Back Greener has a number of different work streams. I've just put 4 of the main ones up here so that you can see that the natural processes work stream sits alongside a number of others. Being a conservation charity, we're very keen to sort of promote native woodland and woodland with a conservation focus and a conservation outcome. So as well as natural processes, we have, for example, new woodland that will link and buffer ancient woodland. And the grant programme is being delivered through a number of partners. Certainly the Woodland Trust's element of Grow Back Greener, the work on the grounds is being carried out not just by our own advisors, but by this range of partners. So the 2 of the national parks, the Ribble Rivers Trust, the partnership in South Yorkshire, and so on. So we're capitalising on the local knowledge and expertise of the people on the ground in those areas. So the key features of our natural processes grant are, I think, that it's extremely flexible. We're aiming for innovation and experimentation. So, you know, as Louise said, there's a risk in this kind of work. You know, none of us really have all of the answers when it comes to trying to create woodland through natural processes. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Every site seems to be different, and so we're encouraging different approaches because we want this grant programme to contribute to the larger body of knowledge and evidence around how to create woodland in this way. So because of that, we offer a really high level of advisor support because we recognise that, you know, landowners are not going to be experts in creating woodland through natural processes, that it might need a bit of co-design and co-creation. So we handhold people through the entire process, I would say, and that's a key feature of our Grow Back Greener programme as a whole. And we take a sort of adaptive approach. So rather than thinking that we're going to have all of the answers right at the start of the process, we recognise that, you know, we'll come up with a plan, but that might need to change depending on how things respond to the activities that we do. So it's very much an ongoing relationship with the landowner. It's you know, we sort of expect to be in contact with the landowners in this case for a number of years. So we're looking at creating new native woodland. Obviously, as Woodland Trust, we want to see new native woodland. Similar to the other schemes, the site needs to be within 75 metres of a seed source, or else we can use direct seeding as well. The way that we fund is that rather than having standard costs, we aim to fund. In most cases, we fund 100% of the capital costs and any management interventions that are needed over the 10 years of the agreement in order to establish the woodland. Ultimately, we want to see a woodland established. So it's kind of, you know, what's it going to take to do that? And therefore, what do we need to pay for? And sometimes that might mean changing tax slightly or bringing in additional items along the way. And then once we get to the end of the process, if the woodland is established, or establishing, you know, it's on the right trajectory, then there's a bonus payment of £500 per hectare at year 5. But if stocking's not achieved by year 5, we can extend that period to 10 years. So if you were to apply for this grant, you would be put in touch with an advisor, either a Woodland Trust advisor or one of our delivery partners. And the site assessment, sort of site suitability assessment that Louise talked about, very, very similar. So, you know, not to go into detail on that because it'll be the same kind of process for all of these schemes. But the advisor would come out and do that with the landowner and help them through that process. So looking at you know what might be needed to establish woodland on that site, looking at where the suitable seed sources are, looking at what we might expect to happen on that site, setting objectives based on the landowner's aims, calculating the costs, and producing a design. So the picture that you can see here is the hatched areas are a natural processes scheme, and it's running alongside a traditional planting scheme on the right hand side there. So we'd then write a management plan for that site, which would look at what maintenance might be needed, what additional activities might be needed. And then we would visit every year over the first 5 years to monitor, to look at how things are going, provide feedback to the landowner, and then potentially to agree any additional activities that might need to be funded where that's within the budget. So although technically the criteria there's a sort of 0.1 hectares minimum for schemes, in practice it's logistically not really possible for us to do such tiny schemes, but we will go down to a 0.1 hectare block size within a minimum 0.5 hectare scheme overall. There's no need to register with the RPA for this particular scheme. Up to 20% open space, but in some cases we can look for up to 40% depending on the design of the scheme. Maximum 30% shrubs. And unlike the other schemes, we are looking for a higher number of trees and shrubs per hectare by year 5 or by year 10, reaching an average height of 0.5 meters. And then the way that we actually pay the grant is also really flexible. So in most cases, we will pay in arrears after capital works are completed. But in some cases where that's going to be an issue for the landowner, we can actually pay some instalments in advance to help with cash flow. And some of the delivery partners that we work with also offer a direct delivery option. So we pay the grant to them and they will actually arrange contractors and arrange the work on the landowner's behalf. So that also helps landowners for whom cash flow is an issue. And then we have a 15-year legal agreement with the landowner to establish the woodland. So that's a bit of a gallop through. And I was just going to finish with a nice picture of Wild Ingleborough, which is a Yorkshire Wildlife Trust project in the Yorkshire Dales, which is one of the sites where we have one natural processes grant up and running, or grant scheme up and running, to establish woodlands in this area, and we've got another one sort of in our pipeline. So this is where we've been using cattle to graze, to break up the ground, to create the conditions for natural regeneration adjacent to an existing ancient woodland. So just really nice sometimes to see things actually in action. And that kind of work, that sort of grazing, whatever might be needed, fencing, provision of water supply, whatever for cattle, all of those can be included within the costs for establishing the woodland through natural processes. So I'll finish there and hand over back to Susanna.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Now we're going to hear from Tim at Mersey Forest.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Tim Oliver. I'm the Trees for Climate Coordinator of the Mersey Forest, and I'll give you a quick romp through just before we break for questions. So in the time available, I shall try and be concise. Can somebody just confirm you can see my screen? Yeah, brilliant. So I'm going to quickly romp through. So, oops, just bear with me. For some reason, is that moving? Yep. So Mersey Forest is one of the 13 community forests in England. That gives you a quick overview of the area that we cover. We have a 10-year plan, which is entitled More from Trees. That's currently being reviewed at the moment. The quick overview of the things we'll cover as I romp through. And as has been mentioned already, we're working with DEFRA funding, and we're one of the woodland creation partnerships under the Nature for Climate programme, and we're dealing with both the climate emergency and the biodiversity emergency. And one of the great things with trees, of course, is that they can contribute to both agendas, and particularly natural colonisation. So, as I say, one of 13 community forests in England. And the only contradiction to what Rachel said earlier about the UCO funding in the grey area was that if you sit within one of these community forests, then you will be entitled to apply for the Trees for Climate funding. We work very closely with Forestry Commission colleagues, Natural England, and 76 local authorities. There's a schematic there just showing the different types of woodland that the Trees for Climate funding can support. And you'll see the natural colonisation one down the bottom right-hand corner there. I'm quite happy that we can share these slides, but just in the interests of getting through to the really exciting questions and answers session, I'll just run through quite quickly now. Where we differ from UCO, whilst we have a very similar approach in terms of our approach to natural colonisation, we have a much more flexible approach to applications. Our tree planting funding is very different to UCO, so we're not just UCO, England Woodland Creation Offer by another name. Don't think that for a moment. We tend to have a simple application form or an inquiry form, because often we'll get people phoning us and saying, oh, I'm interested in trees, I've heard something on the radio, like to do my bit. So we ask them just to fill in a simple expression of interest, give us an idea of the area that they're talking about so we can do the kind of desk-based checks. Our woodland advisors would then follow that up. But in simple terms, we have not even a 0.1 of a hectare. Often we'll grant aid under that, but we would, formally say that it's a 0.1 of a hectare minimum. And there's scope to mix an application with tree planting, or have supplementary planting included as well. And I was modifying my slides just as Sian was talking, I think, as well, because our delivery model, we can give both a grant. So where the applicant is perhaps a land manager themselves and they're happy to organise the work, then we just give them a grant. For those people perhaps on the urban edge or peri-urban edge who are less familiar with land management or trees and woodlands, then we can go and do the job for them, or any combination therein. The other thing is we, as I say, are flexible. We can help with the Forestry Commission's regulatory process, whereas often if you're applying for the England Woodland Creation Offer, you're expected to go and get an agent to do that on your behalf. It's a 15-year period of obligation, and our support is free. We have a gentleman's agreement, if that's the politically correct term, with Forestry Commission, that within the community forest areas, they would generally, promote the Trees for Climate funding offer, because that's, confined to the area of the community forest boundary. We do have a bit of a halo or buffer on that, because sometimes let's say an estate might have an office within the forest, but one of their parcels of land might be outlying the hard boundary. So we had a sort of a 10-mile buffer, and that's particularly good where there might be some benefit accrued within the community forest from planting or woodland creation outside of the boundary. Here is a site that's marked out and actually been planted, but equally you could see in that sort of environment that natural colonisation would have been an option. And the pros and cons, well, has been covered by other colleagues. you know, in order to achieve successful colonization, then you need to have a seed source. We would look at the land and just see, you know, is there browsing pressure? Can we control that by exclusion or control measures? As does the vegetation on site at the moment, does that need any kind of work to create the right conditions to allow seed to colonize and so on? So I have to give credit to Colin Binney from the Forestry Commission, who we work with quite closely. This is Colin's table, but it was just a nice way of presenting today. But, you know, so the factors that we would consider when looking at the opportunity for natural colonization, you know, you can look at that from the flip side, and equally it's the sort of things that we would consider for funding as well. Just half an eye on the clock, I want to romp through. We all know the benefit of trees and woodlands for carbon sequestration, but there's so much more that it can offer. And one of the areas, you know, would be water quality, riparian zones. And you can see there from this, again, schematic that, sorry, the previous slide, of all those benefits. A piece of work we're doing at the moment is looking at almost like the need and opportunity, and combining the two. So you could imagine that the need in riparian zones, or where there's delicate watercourses, where there's some priority in terms of needing to you know, look at water management, flood risk, and so on, that creates a really good opportunity to look at woodland creation. And of course, natural colonization, the processes are much more kind of naturalistic, often less intrusive. So that would be, you know, something quite appropriate when looking at those sensitive catchments. So I should just introduce my colleagues. Both Dave and Lauren are on this call. Their email addresses are on there. If you don't have time to make a note of those, if you go onto the Mersey Forest website, there's an inquiry form where people can lodge an interest. And I should say that I'm representing all 13 community forests in England today as well. So, you know, happy that you might make an initial inquiry with ourselves. So, but Susanna, just in the interest of time, I think I'll close there. Sorry about this pace of romping through.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. You did very well to get through all of that. So now we'll move on to a question and answer session. So please feel free to post questions in the chat. We've had lots of interesting discussions already. And as far as I can see, I think most things that have already been put in there have been answered to some degree. So I'll just, well, we'll give it a moment. I'll just say as well that we'll put the recording of this webinar up on our website through our YouTube channel. So it will be available if you want to share it with colleagues who might want to watch and couldn't come today or anything like that. I haven't had any questions yet, so I'll start off with one, which is how have you found land managers and people applying for this funding to perceive natural colonization as opposed to tree planting? And are there some barriers where they are reluctant to use it for certain reasons? Are they worried about the risks, or actually do they find tree planting more rewarding? What sort of things have you come across?
I'm happy to have first stab at that if it's helpful. Yeah, I think often we're impatient and we sometimes want to see instant results, you know, and typically we often get asked to plant standards and things, but where we you know, spend some time liaising with owners and advising them, we can demonstrate the benefit of planting younger planting stock, and you know, the benefits of considering natural colonization. Being a community forest, we have a number of community events where people want to go and plant a tree, and I suppose there's the opportunity to combine, you know, planting a few trees as part of a kind of a precursor to allowing a little bit more time for natural colonization. But would be a quick response from me.
Thanks very much. Yep, Sian.
Yeah, just say, I think some landowners do see it as a bit of a risk, but I think in many cases the people who are looking at this particular grant are coming to it from a very nature conservation point of view, and they can see the benefits from that perspective. So often they're quite keen to try. And I think, given that, I think with all of these grant programs, there's a lot more support and advice and guidance available now for people trying to do it. So it does become more doable.
Great,
I think
thank you.
it depends on the wider objectives of the scheme as well. We encourage them, if you're interested, do that assessment, but having carried out that assessment and taking that step back, seeing whether or not it really is a viable option for them, that's the stage at which that decision needs to be made. Alec?
No, I think that's fair, Louise. It needs to be thought about. I think I was just going to add that I know we're working with Forest Research at the minute as well, just to look at how we present that natural colonisation offer to land managers, to make sure maybe they understand what that means. And I think I'd have to defer to my colleagues in Forest Research on that, but they do seem to be picking up on something about is how that term is perceived by land managers. And we're sort of looking at other almost like other bits of language we could use to help promote that natural colonisation offer. So that's something that certainly we're looking into.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, yeah, we're talking to them as well as part of the project, which partly prompted my question. Lauren, did you have anything to add?
No, similar to what everyone else has said. We have had ones where, like Tim has said, volunteers want to get involved with planting, but there's scope for natural colonisation and volunteering. So designating a strip near existing woodland for natural colonisation and then doing planting in another compartment, for example.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a really nice combination. So Kevin, you've got your hand up. I'll quickly allow you to speak. Kevin, are you able to ask your question? Okay, maybe if you could type it, that would be better. I have enabled. I thought you'd be able to appear, but sorry, not appearing. So we've got a question in the chat from Matt Stanway saying, should applied nucleation be promoted and incentivized further? So that's where small patches of planting take place amongst a wider area where you might leave it to naturally colonize.
Happy to have the first go at that. I think we've touched upon this already, to be honest, and I think a mixed economy can work quite well, and I think the only challenge there is trying to capture it in a landowner agreement and grant offer would be the challenge, I think. But I don't think we should allow the administration part of the process to govern what might be the right thing on the ground. That's a challenge that we have to cover, I think.
Thank you. Sian, did you want to add something? I can see you nodding. No. Okay, great. And so one other thing I was wondering about, I thought it might be interesting to discuss, is the time frame over which there are management payments for, well, I suppose it relates to both natural colonisation and planting, but do you think that natural colonisation actually potentially requires a bit more management much later on in the process because it's slower and you'll get much more scrub and potentially maybe not always unwanted species, but you might need to control quite dominant species like brambles after 10 or 15 years. What do you think about that?
Okay, and I'll and just to avoid the awkward silence, I'll chip in. So I think for me, yes, we try and anticipate what nature might do, but we can't second guess it. I think we might box this off to some degree by having a management plan where we actually set out a number of different scenarios, and I guess the people who are funding us at the moment, we can't change the the sort of conditions of the grant and the period of grant. But I think there's an inextricable link to me between woodland creation and woodland management, and that's going to be the focus of our attention as we've created all these new woodlands. How we bring those woodlands into management. So I think cover it with a management plan in the first instance, and then look to bring it into ongoing management of existing woodlands thereafter as a starter.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think you're right that some unexpected things can happen, but that can also happen on planted sites as well, actually. And sometimes you have to go in and do things that you weren't expecting to have to do. And I think what we kind of need is that continuity really of support and funding. So at the moment we've got really good funding for woodland creation, takes us up to a certain point, but then there's a bit of a danger of a drop off the cliff once we get to that point, and we tend to not really be either have the capacity or the funding to support people beyond that particularly well. And I think that's a real concern when we're in a phase of such a push on woodland creation.
Sian, I feel the need to quote my catchphrase here, that a woodland is for life, not for Christmas, because everyone gets really excited about the the woodland creation, the first part of it, and then forget about the many years of hard work to follow. But in all seriousness, I think getting the woodlands established early and established well, that initial high intensity period of maintenance can be quite short, and if we can fund that through our funding programs, that's a really good head start. But then I'm sure there's a wider discussion about how we might continue to support woodland management thereafter, and that might be advice, not necessarily just funding, but feel appropriate to introduce Alec and his colleagues about some of the woodland training that's going on, because that's a really important part of having the skill, expertise and resource to link to that as well.
In terms of the maintenance of the site beyond the scheme age, we do pay sort of £350 per hectare per year. It might be that not all of that funding is needed in the same way that it would be with traditional tree planting. So some of that money may be used towards the end of the scheme rather than earlier. It might be sort of spread differently than it would be under traditional planting.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Alec.
Alec might want to talk to you about the training.
Well, I confess I don't know too much about what we're doing in terms of wider sector capacity, but obviously through the England tree planting programme, there's a big drive to sort of make sure that we've got the skills and the workforce to sort of manage woodlands and sort of nurture these new planting schemes through to becoming established woodlands. I probably don't have much to add to what perhaps Tim and Sian have said there about long-term planning is bread and butter for forestry, really. Equally, I think important personally for natural colonisation schemes, and some of those activities will a lot of that will be driven by landowner objectives and what they want to get out of the scheme and what their end, if you like, destination is, whether they're planting or they're using natural colonisation or a mixture of approaches to get there. So yeah, I think that long-term planning is important, and it's a point well made by Sian about making sure that the grant landscape, if you like, supports can support the longer term sort of management of these new woodlands. But yeah, we need land managers to think to the future as well. I think even when they're looking at natural colonisation, it's not a quick win. They need to, I think, for me, have a plan for that land in the long term.
Certainly, thank you. Great, so we've got a few more questions in the chat and not much time left. I'm going to start with one which is a slight change in direction, which is Alex Evans. It would be good to learn more about natural colonisation on peri-urban schemes, if possible, as a lot of the research and case studies seem to be focused on rural sites. So I'm going to assume that Tim and Lauren might have something to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I'd come back to the same starting point though, which is that triangle, if you like, of seed source and looking at the conditions. Any we might, instead of having browsing mammals, we might have the two-legged kind of version of problems, but same sort of thing really. But no, more research the better, I think. Don't know if Dave or Lauren want to add anything.
No, I've got nothing to add to that. I mean, most of the sites that we do follow up in natural colonisation, when I go on site visits, you see the evidence happening. So it tends to be in the rural areas. But I definitely think should be more research into it. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we've also had a question from Stan Smith asking about the Woodland Carbon Code. I'm not sure if people here will be able to answer actually, but it'd be good to try. The required distance from an adjacent woodland is 50 meters rather than 75 like in UCO. And is there any way that this could be updated through our latest knowledge and evidence?
I'm not sure who's best placed to answer that, but I know that we work really closely with the Woodland Carbon Code team, and I'm sure Forestry Commission colleagues do as well. I guess we're in the relative early days of the Carbon Code, so the more we learn, the more that it can relate to the grant mechanisms and so on. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure Forestry Commission colleagues can open that dialogue really.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Tim. I mean, with the whole design of UCO, we don't want to crowd out private finance, and the Woodland Carbon Code is a key route for people to potentially, bring in private finance. So we don't want to crowd it out. People might not believe it, but we do want UCO and grant office to be simple to access as well. So trying to align things where we can is something we want to do. So I think that's something we can take away and check in. There's possibly a good reason for it, but if there isn't, we can look at how we can perhaps align, especially with other sort of offers, sort of adopting that 75 meters as well. So happy to take that away.
Thanks very much. Okay, we've gone past 1:30, so I feel it's probably time to draw to a close. I'm sorry, there was one more question about whether there are examples of natural colonisation working, and yes, there certainly are. Have a look at some of the resources, academic and non-academic, that have been posted in the chat as a starting point. And I think everyone here, I'm sure, has examples of natural colonisation working, or they wouldn't be giving such enthusiastic talks. So thank you so much for the speakers. It's been a really informative event, and just looking at the chat, we've had so much interesting information shared and lots of fantastic conversations. So I'm very grateful that you've all been able to speak. I think it'd be good if we could share your details with people just one last time. So if everyone's happy to do that, I could do that via an email later, because you're very knowledgeable, and it'd be really great if people who are interested could tap into that. So thanks very much, and we'll post details of our next webinar on the website when we're ready to. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.